So welcome back, everyone. It's good to see so many people back online this evening. I see all of your names on the screen, but in our continued time of COVID, I'm just looking at the camera. So I look forward to a time when we can be together physically and practice and share some refreshments afterwards and everything. So I hope everyone's doing really well and still doing our best to stay healthy and keep our lives going in this difficult time. So happy you could take some time out this evening to share with us and do a little study of the Dharma. And I will try to stay on track tonight, so we'll have time for meditation also. So before I get started, are there any questions or concerns? I hope everything's working smoothly. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat box yet. So the comment in the chat is about art crate. So we have several new statues arriving here to the temple, and those arrived, it was mailed as one container, and I think in customs it was taken apart. So we ended up with two containers, and those did arrive successfully. I'm still unwrapping everything. It's very delicate and there's a lot of packaging. So in the days and weeks to come, you will see the space behind me change as we invite our new Buddhas and Bodhisattvas into the temple space. So that was an order that started far before COVID, but one of those new additions is the Medicine Buddha, which I think is very timely. So that will be one of our new additions here at Heinjoji at the temple here. So when that is fully installed, so we need to make some carpentry work to make space for them. I'm sure we will introduce them to all of you virtually as well as some people here in person. So thank you for that question. Yes, I received several large shipments. I thought today we would start off with reciting the Heart Sutra. We are talking quite a bit about concepts like emptiness, and of course that is also the basis of the teaching in the Heart Sutra. And I think it helps to combine a little bit of practice as we're studying in depth and to keep our practice and study combined. So I'll put the text on screen, and I invite you to recite along with me. And if you're not familiar with the recitation, I invite you to listen, but we'll do that first. So you should see the text online. Setmaka hanya haramita shingyo kanji zaibo sagyo jin hanya haramita ji shoken gon kaiku doi saiku yaku shari shiki fui Fuku fui shiki shiki zokuze fuku zokuze shiki ju sogyo shiki yakubu nyoze shari shize shohoku so fusho fumetsu fuku fujo fuzo fuge 税国中無式無住創業式無限に微税心に無式証拠未速報無限界内し無意識外無無明薬無無明人内し無老死薬無老死人無苦十滅道無死薬無得意無上等公膨大サッタエハンヤハラミタコ真無形下無形下コ無苦不恩利一切天道無足行涅槃三世小仏へ般若波羅蜜多高徳阿のくたら三脈三宝大高知般若波羅蜜多世大人中世大名衆世無常衆世無東道衆道場一切空真実不幸公説般若波羅蜜多収束摂取圧逆定逆定ハラ逆定ハラソ逆定ボジスワカハンヤThank you. As I mentioned, I think it's helpful to connect the practices that we do normally as part of services and daily practice with this part of the lecture. So I'm going to try to do that as we go through, and more so as we go through Awakening of Faith and these lectures in the future. I'll try to give more daily life experience. The Awakening of Faith is a commentary. It is a way for students to bring together a lot of different concepts that you'll find in the sutras into a single text and sort of connect all of them. So it's one of the earliest attempts of doing that. And it has been one that's endured and been a classic in East Asian Buddhism. It's really helpful for a high level view of how these different concepts that we'll find in the sutras connect. And so these are good reminders. We're taking it in bite-sized chunks. And so sometimes we may lose track of where we are, which is different than if you were to just sit down and read it all at once or kind of go through it within a week or two. We are several months in, so I think it's helpful to relate the different components of the text to what's going on in our lives and what's going on in our world right now. So we're going to get back into the text. I think, let's see, we are on I had it up here. There we go. We're on page 45 of the PDF. So if you have the PDF version, which we're using for the class, this is Professor Hakeda's translation. I will put that up on screen too, so you can follow along with me as we read together. Okay. So it starts off with the question, how can they be inferred? So I will back up and remind us of what is the they that is being spoken of here. And last time the text was discussing, we were in the midst of discussing the qualities of enlightenment. And it's something that the text described as the excellent qualities of enlightenment, of the enlightened mind specifically. And it connected those qualities with how the text translates as suchness. And by suchness, it means enlightenment itself, or the enlightened mind. What is it for the mind to be enlightened? So what are these excellent qualities? And as I mentioned last time, the text takes, I don't want to say the unusual step, but we don't often see the attributes of the enlightened mind discussed. Sometimes, rather, the Buddhist texts are discussing all the obstacles we have to revealing the enlightened mind. So those obstacles, when they're read over and over, can sometimes sound negative. So we often come away, especially in translation, reading texts that sound like a list of problems. As I often say, it almost sounds like a doctor's diagnosis. These are all your symptoms. And what we want to try to do in this text also is think of all the positive things that come from the enlightened mind. So that is the they. How can they be inferred? How can all these positive qualities of the enlightened mind be inferred? So it says, answer, all things are originally of the mind only. They in fact transcend thoughts. Nevertheless, the deluded mind in non-enlightenment gives rise to irrelevant thoughts and predicates the world of objects. This being the case, we define this mentality as a state of being destitute of wisdom, avidya, or ignorance. I'll point out that I think this is a really helpful way of translating ignorance is destitute of wisdom. As I often mention, the way we use ignorance today is sort of pejorative. We might call someone ignorant or refer to someone's actions or ideas as ignorant, and it's not usually polite. So ignorance, when it's used in a Buddhist text, is not meant to be a insult. I think this is a really good way of saying it's just the state of being destitute of wisdom. So the text continues, the essential nature of mind is immutable in that it does not give rise to any deluded thoughts and therefore is the very opposite of ignorance. Hence, it is spoken of as having the characteristic of the light of great wisdom. Okay, so I will pause there and give you a little bit of insight into what the text is talking about. In essence, this part of the Awakening of Faith says everything we experience is beyond what we think it is. So maybe better put, we could say things exist outside of our mental understanding or mental conception of them. So everything has an independent existence separate from what we think about it. Maybe more simply, everyone you encounter on the street has a life separate from your opinion of them. So these things are very different. Things, any phenomena in the universe has an independent existence outside of the label we give it, outside of the category we put it into. So all of these things have an independent existence. A good example would be, let's say you look into the night sky and you see a variety of constellations and all these countless stars. Our understanding of the night sky is based largely on our position in the universe. So let's take, some of the most recognizable constellations. They have names that make sense from our perspective. So the constellations are arranged, we think, or as we label it, simply from our perspective here. So the Big Dipper probably doesn't resemble a dipper from somewhere else in the universe. I'm sure someone will write about this in a few hundred years as their spaceship travels through space and they say, oh, from over here, it actually looks like a spoon, or it doesn't look like a dipper at all. So this is purely, it's something we look at and we've labeled and seems so, beyond question, but is strictly based on our perspective, on our viewpoint. So The other way to think about it too is we look into the night sky and there are countless stars, planets that don't yet have a name or label. So each time NASA and other space agencies put better um, microscopes, or I'm sorry, telescopes into space, I think one of the recent missions was to actually upgrade the cameras that were on the Hubble Space Telescope. As we see further and further, we see new things. They existed before we could see them. They have an independent existence. They have characteristics that we don't know of yet. But of course, we're busy going about numbering them, categorizing them, and giving them names. So this is true for um, everything in the universe, but we are very attached to the label. And the label we give things really um, colors the way we think about things. So I'll give you an example. I When I first traveled to Asia, I noticed that most every place I went to had a very poetic name. So if you're in China or Japan, most places have very poetic names. And I would always write down the name of a place I came upon and then look up the characters and try to figure out the name of the place. It was always very an allusion to something usually very beautiful. And I found this striking because in America, many places have names that are very depressing or very negative. So, not far from here in the Columbia Gorge, we have this beautiful place called Angel's Rest. It's a wonderful lookout in the Columbia Gorge. Um, but then if you go further up the same trail, there's like a Devil's Rest, right? Because it's higher up. So we have a tendency to give things very negative names. So your impression of the place is colored by the label that's given it. So years ago, I took somebody on the hike to Angel's Rest and they saw the sign, the Devil's Rest. And so their immediate response was, well, this must be Devil's Rest because it was just straight up and I'm exhausted and it's so hot today. And I said, no, it's Angel's Rest. And then they looked at the view and, oh, it's really beautiful. Um, so we have this different sort of culture. So another one, very famous in our country is Death Valley. And I think this is probably, one of the more striking, unfortunate negative labels that's given to a place. But Death Valley and all of these places have an independent existence before we labeled it as such. There is tremendous life actually in Death Valley, depending on the season. And when I thought of this as an example, I wondered what, the Native Americans had as a name. So the native Shoshone people actually call Death Valley the place of red ochre. So if it's called the place of red ochre and you're going to the place of red ochre National Park, your expectations may be very different. Your experience in that place may be very different. Even if it's hot, everything that flows from the name may have a different impression on your mind than just the label. So the Buddhist teaching spends a lot of time pointing out our tendency of labeling things and how that colors our impressions. You see this everywhere. You see it if an organization wants to have a new initiative. They label that initiative and make sure the marketing and branding behind the product is very useful. I grew up in Detroit, so as most people know, Motor City, known for cars, and Chevy was famous for having not done good research when it had introduced the Chevy Nova to Mexico, because Nova, of course, in English, like, oh, it's a star, something very bright and shiny. But in Spanish is Nova, does not go. So no one wanted to buy a car that didn't go. So it completely changed people's perception of the product. Same product, same function, but impression and obviously sales numbers very different. So the labels are very important to how we view things. And that's true. The strength of language in this way is very true for how we think, because we think in language for the most part. As soon as you begin to acquire language, your inner monologue takes over, and everything is your mental process is in language. So, perhaps if you can remember back that far, remember back to when you're, maybe 6 months of age, and you're in the crib and you look up and you see, your mother's face, and so you smile. So this is a familiar symbol. This symbol gives you comfort. This symbol gives you food. This symbol keeps you warm. And so it brings you joy. Later on, it becomes mom, and the thought process takes over as a label. And so it still has these positive connotations. So if we really look at the power of language, we'll start to see both its power to shape our thinking and also its limitations. So here, the text is pointing out some of the limitations. It points out how the mind thinks and how it's bounded by language, and how we need to go beyond, right? A lot of our avidya, our ignorance, our being devoid of wisdom, is this latching on and being so sure that the labels are so important. I think this is Shark Week, right, on Discovery Channel. So I watched a documentary on sharks, and I was very intrigued on this one because there's a new researcher in the Caribbean, and he is convinced that sharks are social and have a much higher level of intelligence, and are actually very affectionate. And so, of course, this destroys all the models or ideas that we have of sharks. But he's spent so much time diving, he can actually pet sharks, and shows they will come back to be rubbed just like dogs. And there's video of this. It was fascinating to watch. So this is another layer that comes out in a lot of Buddhist texts. Buddhist texts, sometimes there's all these lists of categories, all these lists of attributes, and it might seem tedious. It's trying to help us expand our mind and our thinking from what we think something is. We have a tendency to think things are very bounded, things are only one way. We think of sharks as predators, and that's what they do. They swim and eat. They're to be feared. But if we learn more about them, then we expand our understanding. If we learn, I think they put a GoPro on some of these sharks, and they found they're very social. Like the same shark travels with the same group of sharks for years. If a shark does something, the other sharks learn from that shark, and they can do the same thing. So then our awareness or idea of shark, right, this label, changes because we've learned more. So the sutras are in many ways doing the same thing. The Buddha had over 40 years to teach, and spent a great deal of time explaining how the mind functions and explaining it in great detail. We can sometimes read that as tedious or boring. What's supposed to do, though, is actually expand our thinking and make us realize that the things that thought we were so sure of, actually, there's a much broader understanding. So this was the way, part of the way the Buddha said, this is how the enlightened mind works. This is the beauty of it, is all this unfolding detail and unfolding perspective. So here in the Awakening of Faith, you have this more positive view. And I think if we think of the enlightened mind this way, then we're better off than thinking, as someone once told me, religion is nothing more than rules about things you can't do. So that's not the case, actually. But what I think the Buddhist teaching is getting at is life potentially is short. We don't know how much time we have. So we need to take this seriously and get to work. So the first things we need to point out are where we're going wrong. Again, sorry for the car reference, but you might have a very cool car and you're really intent on driving cross country. Well, you want to make sure that you get it checked out and that everything is functioning correctly so that you can finish the journey. And when you're thinking about taking that trip, the paint job and other cool features may not be number one on the list to get checked out. What's going to be most important is the basic functioning. So we have a similar thing going on in the sutras. But as I mentioned last week, this is one of those times where we have a short break from the lists of negative aspects, and it's presented in a very positive way. The other way to look at this is the Buddhist teaching is telling us our mind has a lens on it, right? So you could think of the mind like binoculars or telescope or, glasses. And there's a tint to these glasses. So it changes the way we see things. And this lens that's in front of our eyes is called avidya, or what the text here calls the state of being destitute of wisdom. So this state of being destitute of wisdom lens is in front of your eyes. And the wisdom that the sutras talk about is removing this lens so that we see without the color additive. We see without, less light coming in, all these kind of things that the lens changes. So the lens distorts the things we see. So we see things, but we're not seeing them clearly. We're seeing it through this lens. We're seeing it from this unique perspective. We base our understanding of the world on this distorted view, almost like funhouse mirror lenses for your glasses, right? So we see some things and they're squished down, other things are pulled out really wide. And this is the avidya, the ignorance, this lack of wisdom that the sutra talks about. So the sutras definitely spend more time telling us all about how we see things wrong, because before we encountered this teaching, no one could tell us differently. We are so sure that the way we're seeing things is absolutely the case, that to tell us otherwise, we initially reject this idea. And we reject it because, we say, we check with the person next to us. Are you seeing it that way? Do you see it the same way? We compare notes. And, everyone seems to see it this way. You're the only one saying it's different. You're reading the text. That's not the way I experience it. But as we read it more in depth, we start to get a finer grained understanding of what it's telling us and starts to link our experience to the way we see and label things. So if we base our understanding on a distorted view of reality, the wisdom is more of a granular removal of the lens. Very slowly, the lens is removed, right? We're wiping it away, and we get to see more clearly how things really are. And as we do, a whole new understanding is revealed to us. So in this way, if we think of the Buddhist teaching as nothing more than instructions on how the mind functions, because this lens is in place, and then how to remove that lens, right? Practices for removal. Should we wipe this way, or should we wipe this way, or should we use a cleaner? Different people have different thickness of the lens. Like, what's the best way to clean it for different people? So that is the basis of the Buddhist teaching. In many ways, it's very simple. And a lot of people read this and go, then why does it seem so complex? What is all this stuff for, right? If it's so simple, if that's all it is, what do you need all this for? And this is a fair question, because Shingon is, we have more art, we have more mandalas, we have more mantras, right? So there's more accoutrements and gear than, let's say, some other schools of of Buddhist teaching. Let's say Zen. So let's compare Zen and Shingon. So, Shingon is this tricked out car with, all this aftermarket stuff. And Zen is a Model T, right? Just pure function. And maybe you say, well, Shingon seems like a lot of form and not a lot of function, right? So why the difference in style? The difference is we're all different. The way this lens is attached to our viewpoint is different. And for some of it, it's very deeply embedded. For some of us, it is attached in ways that is very painful to remove. For some of us, it is overgrown with even more problems and issues. So I wear glasses, and every once in a while it'll occur to me like, wow, they're really dirty. I can hardly see it. I think, oh, it's the windshield in the car. Actually, it's the lenses on my glasses. Or you go in someplace and the glasses fog up. Or, in the days now where we're wearing masks, get the glasses fogging up. Those of you who wear glasses understand. So there may be other things that make this lens difficult to navigate. So for that reason, we have different methods and different schools of Buddhism or different focuses on the teaching. It's not that we should look at the Buddhist teaching is very simple, therefore we should keep it simple. I think there's a lot of people, especially in the West, you'll see this movement. We should only focus on early Buddhism. Early Buddhism seems very simple. Why can't it be that simple? So I'll address that question. Hopefully someone's thinking it. If not, this is the question we're going to talk about. So the sutras say, if you read, the suttas, the Buddha attains enlightenment. He goes back to his other 5 monks with whom he was practicing, and they wake up very quickly. They notice, oh, you're different. You've had some insight. How did you do that? And he explains to them the Four Noble Truths and Pratitya Samutpada, the 12 links of dependent causation. So he gives them this very simple teaching. This is how the mind works. You start at avidya and ignorance, and one thing after another, you have these attachments, and it leads to more attachments and ignorance, and the cycle continues. That's all they needed, and they woke up. Oh, really? Oh, I see. Right? They went off and meditated on that for a few weeks, and they woke up. We have more dirt on our lens than they did. I think they had perfectly clear lenses. It was removed. They probably just needed a slight adjustment, and then it all became clear. For us, the job is more difficult. The lens is more deeply embedded. The attachments to it, we don't want to let it go. We fight this change very deeply. So through the course of human history, later Buddhist teachers have found new, unique, and novel ways to remove it. And some of them are austere. Some of them use the fullness of art. Some of them, like Shingon, recognize that one of our big problems is language and tries to undermine language by using language in different ways, like through mantras or sutra chanting, or recognizes that the ultimate truth is right in front of you, but you can't see it, nor can I explain it, but you could be, let's say, inspired to see it. And you could be inspired to see it by something beautiful artwork, or by getting you out of your normal surroundings. I can't see all of you on your screen, but maybe some of you grew up in a big city. Maybe some of you grew up in the countryside. I grew up in the big city, so I didn't get a chance to see mountains, and especially not mountains big enough to have snow on them, until I was in my 20s. So I'd only seen these things in books. And growing up as a child, I would go skiing in Michigan, and we would go to the mountain to go skiing. There's nothing more than like 500 feet tall in Michigan, though. So what I thought was a mountain was not really even a hill. So when I got to the West Coast and I saw real mountains, and someone asked me if I wanted to go skiing, I said, no, that's very different from what I learned to do. Um, so our perspective on things, how deeply embedded we are with regard to our understanding of things, our ideas of things are very different depending on where we're from. And so we may need new and inventive ways to teach. So when I saw the mountains, I was stunned. I couldn't talk. I was in awe of what I thought was a mountain before, and what I came to know was actually a mountain. So to this day, when I see anything tall with snow on top, I always have to stop, and it's still very striking. But if you grew up with that, then it may require you to leave the area and come back to really appreciate it. So you need a pilgrimage, let's say, to have this appreciation. You have to learn it in a different manner. I know someone who's from the Pacific Northwest, and they looked at trees here and took them for granted. They thought, oh, it's just a tree. I'm going to travel the world and find beautiful places. And so they traveled the world and they saw trees. And their perspective, they would ask people, why are trees so small? Everywhere they went, how come the buildings are taller than the trees here? Not realizing that where they grew up was special. It was someplace very different from the rest of the earth. So when they came back, they realized, oh, this is very beautiful. These trees are very big. So all of these things, we get so set in our ways. We're very determined in our thinking, so we need different methods. So the idea that there's only one way to teach Buddhism, the Buddha taught one way and that's it, isn't going to be very helpful to a large group of people. We may need, as the question started off the class, how about the new statuary? Well, why do you need new statuary? The art can be very inspiring. It can really awaken a different understanding of the teaching. It can move us in a new direction. So we have these different methods. It's all based in the teaching. It's not something different. It's different ways of expressing it. So this is one of the reasons why, Shingon looks a little different than others. So what really distinguishes us from, those early companions of the Buddha? Why were they able to wake up, but we weren't? Why does it take us longer? Why have I been working on this for 20 years and, I still walk, my feet still touch the ground? Why is that? Does our method actually work? I would say the students, the Buddha's first students were mere steps behind him in their attainment and practice. They were right there, ready to go. And we are like those kids in high school that skip class and go hang out under the bleachers and smoke cigarettes. And we talk about we can't wait to be free. When I graduate, I'll be free. I'm gonna just get out of here and be free, and then I'll know the real world. And we don't recognize that back in the classroom, there's something for us to learn that's really going to help free us. So a lot of times our outlook, our view on what is beneficial from the very beginning is a little bit different. So how do we sum up this question and answer exchange? So between the last class, the last two pages of the text, page 44 and 45, there's this Q&A that the author puts in. And the reason for that is to assume the reader will have these questions. These are questions that were coming up during his lifetime, and he wanted to address. So he addresses it in this Q&A. So how do you sum this up? The mind's tendency, so the tendency of our mind is to move away from emptiness. We tend to move away from seeing connections, and we see things as very discrete, independent, separately existing. That's our tendency. If we study the teaching, the idea is that we should start to see more connections between things. If we slow down the mind, if we calm the mind more, then we'll see these connections and have appreciation for them. Then we're seeing more of the original nature of the mind. And the way we go about doing that is by studying all the ways the mind goes wrong. So sorry, I use another car analogy. My grandfather was a master mechanic. He could just listen to a car and he would know the problem. And it was amazing to watch because people would actually, in the summer, sitting on the front porch talking to my grandfather, and I was very young. And someone would just drive up and yell out, can you tell me what's wrong? And he'd say, oh, it's this or that. And they'd say, oh, great, thanks. They'd go to the car part store and buy a part to fix it. So he was actually that tuned in. So I guess looking back, I should probably say, he was like the enlightened mechanic. So he was actually that good. Other people who are mechanics would call him, and even over the phone, he would diagnose just from the sound. So the more we see the manifestations of the mind, the more the text can point out the symptoms, the better we are at understanding and seeing them in ourselves. And then, of course, as we progress, then we can see them in others. So we can help other people work on their cars, not just us working on our own. You'll see things and say, see, this is a symptom. This tells me, I'm not seeing things in an interconnected way. I'm seeing things as a separate, right, separation. So now someone's thinking, well, how the heck am I supposed to do that in the middle of all the stuff I have going on, right? I'm stressed out, someone's yelling at me. I can't go to work because of a pandemic. The phone's ringing, kids are yelling. I don't have a quiet place to work. Of course I'm stressed out. Of course I'm angry. Of course I'm frustrated. How am I possibly supposed to see and take a step back and have that kind of awareness? So I guess I want to distinguish between two different categories of obstacle. And it's going to be what I call tough and acute. So what is tough? And feel free to come up with some examples. Someone yelling at you is tough. A lot of stress at work is tough. Someone challenging your intelligence or integrity or your humanity even is tough, right? Do you even know how to do this job? Why did we hire you? Are you sure you know what you're doing? You're really good at this. Here, do 10 times more and have it done by tomorrow, right? Those are tough situations. I think we find ourselves in those situations quite often. Then there's acute. So let me distinguish acute. Acute situations might be someone physically attacking you, right? War, being robbed, someone attacking someone else you care about that you need to step in and defend them some way, right? An elder or a child. So these are acute situations versus tough situations. During the Buddha's lifetime, he faced both and responded differently. And I want to distinguish tough and acute. And these are just my trying to, draw a line between them. To say when we have time to take a breath and remember the teaching, and when we might not. Because I think we're very hard on ourselves when it comes to um, how our expectations for ourselves. So in each of the situations, we have to decide how to respond, and our response is up to us. And if we take a cue from the Buddha's lifetime, so I think 2 weeks ago, I gave the example of the Buddha's cousin who attempted to assassinate him on several attempts. So I would say that that's acute, right? Someone actively trying to kill you is acute. There were times, however, when the Buddha heard that his cousin was in a certain area, and the Buddha chose to avoid. Initially, the Buddha tried to teach his cousin, and he found his cousin was very recalcitrant. He was not going to be listening or changing at all. So the Buddha tried to avoid. Then later on, he directly confronted other people associated with his cousin. But he didn't walk up and, yell at his cousin directly, hey, stop trying to kill me, because that would have probably put him in more danger. Neither, though, did he run away. So there's sort of a fine line between these tough and these acute situations. And I bring this up because I think a lot of people right now, especially here in our city, are facing difficult situations, and they're asking, what's the right way to respond? Do I protest? Do I actively engage with something that I think is oppressive? Do I run away? Do I just wait to vote? Right? What's the right way? And I think the first step is to decide, is it tough or acute? And I think right now we're in a really tough situation. All of these things are tough. Living with a pandemic is tough. Wanting to address social change is tough. What's acute? Acute would be you're in the 60s in the civil rights movement, and police are actively beating you. That's more on the acute side. So how do you face these things? How do you address them? How do you take this teaching and put it to work in the middle of a very difficult time? I think you could compare, where are we actually? Do I have time to step back and regroup? Do I have time to take a breath and consider how to respond? And if you do, then you can use the spiritual teaching. And it's, I think, very relevant. What do you do when people call you names and dehumanize you? What do you do when it's not a question of, if the police are going to dehumanize you? It's a question of when, right? So we have acute and tough. So earlier today, I was listening to NPR, and there was a really good story about a young woman. Well, she's older now, but at the time, teenager, very young, who was at the Selma marches. And Linda Blackman Lowry, she was the youngest marcher in Selma on Bloody Sunday. And she was hospitalized after the march because the police had beaten her. She was arrested numerous times. She continued through the civil rights movement. And I want to distinguish this because we might say that's acute. I'm going to say it was tough, and this is why. Before people went out to march in the civil rights movement, they organized. And they said, we're going to be beaten by the police. When we're beaten by the police, this is how we're going to respond. We are going to be called names. When we are called names, this is how we're going to respond. We have a goal. It's a long-term goal. And this is the way we're going to address this very difficult situation. We know we're putting ourselves in harm's way. We're going to actively put ourselves in harm's way to get the attention of the nation and make change. That's different than, the police busting into your house in the middle of the night, right? That's acute. But when you step back and you devise a strategy and a plan, and then you put yourself in harm's way. It's tough. It's very tough. It's, maybe we'll say it's acutely tough, but a plan's made. You know what to expect. The reality may be more than you realize initially, but you've thought about it, right? There's been some work. So, lesser known part of the civil rights movement was Dr. King would go around. It was late night meetings in a lot of cities. This is how you should respond. This is what you should do. This is how we're going to actually make this movement. So people had a game plan. People were on the same page. There was a playbook for addressing this. And I think in many ways, spiritual practice is a playbook for how to address these situations, but we need to take time to reflect back on them. And this young woman, Linda Blackman Lowry, said that Dr. King gave her specific advice, and that was advice that she carried with her through all the marches, through all the time she was arrested, and all the time she was beaten by police. And the advice was steady, loving confrontation. So, steady, loving confrontation. And I think it was really beneficial for her to recognize that it had to be steady. It had to be ongoing. She couldn't give up. It wasn't something that she was going to drop or turn back on. It had to be loving, right? What perspective were you coming from? And it wasn't running away, but it was confronting. And I think the language here is really important. So remember what I said about language. As Americans, when we see something that needs to be addressed, we use violent language. So we declare war on it, the war on drugs, right? We appoint a czar. We decide to go to battle against it. We fight. The language here, though, is confrontation. We confront it, right? Why don't we shine a light on it? So I think if we change our language, if we recast what it is that we need to do, right? We are in a tough situation. We're in a pandemic. We're working from home. We're in a pandemic. We don't know, if our jobs are safe. We're in a pandemic. We don't know when we're going to see our friends and family again. So how do we confront the situation, right? Not how do we combat the virus? How do we maintain our energy through this marathon? How do we find new strategies to address the needs of people? So I think if we change our language and we start thinking more broadly, right? The sutras are always asking us to think more broadly. Then we have a different energy that we bring. So for the young 14-year-old Linda Lowry, who was beaten by the police and hospitalized and imprisoned, she focused on steady, loving confrontation. I think if she had focused on fighting, she probably wouldn't have been successful. I think if she had focused on battling, she wouldn't have the same perspective and wouldn't be the same person all these years later. So for many of us, it's spiritual practice is done all the time, but it's done in our language, and it's done when we have a chance to step back and give consideration to where we are and what we're doing. So steady, loving confrontation. This is very similar to the paramitas in Buddhism. And in Buddhism, we have 6 paramitas. And the paramitas are the transcendent perfections. So these are attributes of ourselves and of our practice that we want to perfect. These are things we want to actively practice. So I know you all know what the paramitas are, but just in case anyone's forgotten, I will recap what they are. So What are the six paramitas? We have generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, sometimes it's written as vigor, meditative concentration, and wisdom. And three of these are very similar to steady, loving confrontation. So steady is very similar to diligence or vigor, meaning we need to know we have the energy to continue the task. So the Buddha's teaching is telling us it's going to take time, and we need to not gas out. We need to make sure we have the energy. So, before a big race, you got to have a good meal, make sure you have the energy. Same thing. Spiritually, we need to do practice all the time so that when we come to a months-long pandemic, we have the energy to last the entire race. So steady, loving confrontation, loving, compassion, right, from the Buddhist perspective. Also, generosity, any kind of giving is a type of loving or compassion. So how do we give? A lot of the frustration we fear, the antidote to that is giving. So the more we can connect to people, the more we feel less adrift. So when the pandemic first started, personally, I had all these ideas for the things we would do this year with the temple, and spent a lot of time thinking, how do we do it now? Do we just close the doors and wait? What do we do? Then I learned about Zoom, which is not something I had used much before, and now we can continue much of what we do through Zoom. But it's because we all, myself, the temple board members, the members, came together and had ideas and floated them, and people said, yes, we're interested in this new medium. Let's do it that way. So, right, through the generosity, through the giving, the loving part, we can be successful. So steady, loving confrontation. What's the confrontation with the paramitas? I would say probably meditative concentration. So our meditative concentration is something that is about constant awareness. And we develop it through meditation, but we need to be constantly aware of what the needs are and where to direct our energy. So in the civil rights movement, that confrontation was, wherever there was injustice, wherever there was a lunch counter, wherever there was a system that needed to be addressed, it was confronted. For ourselves, it means we need to be always on guard and aware. So our meditation isn't just on the cushion. It means being aware all the time of when the feelings of frustration, those feelings of helplessness are coming up, so that we can say, see, it's happening before it takes over. Right? So if you become more aware, you'll see it as it starts to take over, right? As it's just starting to bubble up, you become more aware of everything. Then all of the lists we find in the sutras, you go, that thing in the sutra was talking about, I never thought about it. Well, maybe that's a manifestation of these feelings I have. And just by being aware of them, you can take the power away from them. And when you take the power away from them, they don't take over. So as soon as you become aware of it, it sort of takes the winds out of its sail. It doesn't build up and then take over you, right? Then you can address from a different perspective. So was the civil rights movement hard? Yes. Does it continue? Yes. How should we address it? I think steady, loving confrontation is good advice. It's also good advice for the difficulties we find ourselves in right now. Regardless of your opinions on politics, I think at the moment it's more, we're all more aware of it. And the more aware of it you are, the more aware of the language that's used, and you'll recognize how unfortunate the language being used by people in political office is, and how impactful, how harmful it can be to those of us listening to it. And it can begin to numb us. So this is something that needs steady, loving confrontation. It needs vigor. It needs generosity. It needs meditative concentration. So these are the ways we get to it. This part of the text is also asking us to look past the surface manifestation and ask what is the real concern. If you can find the real root cause, then you can address it effectively. So, your turn. Here's my question to all of you. You can either use the chat box or chime in. What are the, and I made a list too, so I'll tell you what my list are. What are do you think the top 3 issues facing humanity? What are our top 3 challenges as humans? What 3 things do you think are our biggest challenges? So feel free to, I'll watch the chat box. So please give me your first 3 things that come to mind. 3 biggest challenges. While you do that, then I will sip water.
You mean generally or just in context of life right now?
Silence. Everybody fell asleep.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Providing for family. Okay. Maybe I need to unmute people. Well, you can unmute yourself, I think. There we go. Compassion. Climate, injustice, lack of mutual understanding. Yeah. Good. I'll tell you the 3 I came up with. So I got the question then before I thought too hard. The first things I came up with were climate change, food insecurity, housing insecurity, and war. That's actually 4, but I apologize. Those are the first things that came to mind. So we have some of the same ideas. All right, so these are the things I said, oh, these are the challenges facing humanity. What's underneath those? Greed, right? So everything on there, providing for family. Why are we worried that we can't provide for our families? It's not that we think we can or something. It's we're not practicing generosity. So there's greed somewhere. Why is there climate change? Are we unable to solve the issue? No, we're struggling against greed. Injustice. Why is there injustice? Greed. What's the root cause, right? For example, why people are demonstrating police brutality, these things kind of, what's the underlying cause? Partially it's fear, but a lot of that fear is in greed. What is the, what has been the national response? It's been to change housing policy because part of the policing was keeping people separate, right? And that I don't want you to have what I have, and it's based in fear and greed. So part of what the sutra is asking us to do is to look deeper at the underlying cause, because sometimes we get focused on the hyper small symptom, and when we struggle then to find a solution, we find it difficult, right? So the sutra gives us these like broad lists. It's like tree branches. So all these leaves are these lists in the sutra, but they all come from the same trunk, which is ignorance, avidya. Then it starts to branch off into greed, hatred, delusion, and then it goes farther, smaller. There's all these little manifestations. So as we recognize the manifestations, we're also learning to trace back to what's the root cause. So the awakening of faith is giving us the root cause over and over, but also telling us, where does it really come from? And when we start to see those connections, then a lot of the emotions that we have, right? If we feel hopeless, if we feel like this pandemic's never going to end, we see, unfortunately our country's not doing so well with it, but if we see countries that do much better, what's the, why? If we see countries that are addressing climate change, food insecurity, justice issues better, why? That can help us see through to the real causes. Okay. Let's see. I have all this extra stuff, but I also promised that we would do some meditation. So we will pause there. I'll make a note that we pause and we'll pick up next week. And I will tell you a little bit about this evening's meditation. So one of the things I've heard from more people and witnessed for more people is anger and frustration. So there's a lot of this feelings of anger and frustration right now. And these can be some of the most insidious and difficult emotions to deal with because they are very powerful. The others sometimes manifest more broadly or quite differently, but the frustration, I think, comes from a variety of places, and a lot of times it's helplessness. So we have anger and frustration for a variety of things. There's not, there's not a lot of feel-good stories in the news right now. So there is advice in the Buddhist tradition for dealing with these kinds of feelings of anger and frustration. And I'm going to draw from Master Jiri, who is a monk in the Tiantai, what became Tendai in Japan. The Tiantai tradition in China wrote extensively about meditation and wrote prescriptively about it. So how to know different emotions are coming up, how to recognize them, and then how to address them. So he was very clear that obstacles such as anger, these are very strong emotions, and these are kind of critical obstacles for all of us. And the sutra would say, right, the Buddhist teaching would say, the antidote to anger is practicing kindness and patience. However, when you're angry, you don't feel like practicing kindness and patience. That's not necessarily the first thing that comes to mind. But Jiri, being very much centered in Chinese thinking and philosophy, was aware that very strong emotions can take root in the body. And there are ways to address those emotions from a physical perspective rather than a psychological one. So this is a very holistic view, in my opinion. And one of the, I think, great, and probably in some ways overlooked, but one of the greatest gifts that we have was, as Buddhism moved through China, picked up a great deal of Chinese philosophy, and this philosophy was very holistic in its thinking and was connected with politics, philosophy, ethics, human health, and really helped see more broadly. And of course, it's very much part of the Buddhist idea of interconnectedness. right? So these teachings aren't separate. Spiritual practice isn't separate from political philosophy and all these other things. If we see things interconnectedly and holistically, we can apply them broadly. So there's also connections in Chinese medicine, and Juri drew quite heavily from those sources to address the illnesses, psychological and physical, that he saw meditators dealing with. And some of these things come up as you meditate. Some of these things are in place when you try to meditate. So he has quite a long list of issues that can be addressed through these meditative techniques. So that's what we're going to do this evening. Today, this would be called Qigong. In Juri's time, it would be Daoyin, but actually these are medical practices that predate, our pharmaceutical industry. So as a very learned person, Juri would not have found this to be, foreign or unusual or different. It was just useful, so he wrote about it. So when you get angry, what happens? Maybe your face turns red. Maybe people say you see red. So all of these statements have a connection to the reality. And Juri and ancient traditional Chinese medicine says these kind of feelings will become centered in the liver. And according to Chinese medicine, the liver controls your sight, your seeing also is connected to the eyes. So I find it always interesting when we have these ideas like green with envy, and then where does envy is associated with and what physical organs. But for anger, it's the liver. So to address anger, you should do things that are healthy for the liver. So avoiding too much alcohol, drinking plenty of water. Those are, the base prescriptions for addressing the emotional side, the psychological side also. The others are physical practices directly to benefit the liver. So that's what we're going to do this evening. So there's actual sounds that are associated to heal and harmonize the liver. So the first part of this practice is to sit quietly. So you can sit cross-legged, you can sit in a chair. So you want to sit comfortably. And at the very beginning, you want to breathe in through the nose and then out through the mouth, and just settle the body, right? You want to be very comfortable. So we'll practice that together. At the very beginning, you just breathe deeply in through the nose and out through the mouth. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Again. I'm going to start with at least 5 deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth. And at the very beginning, you just want to calm the mind with your breathing. And then you're going to take your hands together. If you're male, you're going to take the left hand, place it on the abdomen. Female, right hand. But overlap the hands and place them on the abdomen. And as you breathe, try to feel your breathing down at the abdomen. So inhaling in through the nose, exhaling. So you want to actually feel with your hands the lower abdomen, inhaling and exhaling. Part of this is to make sure we're breathing more deeply. We have a tendency to breathe only in the chest. So throughout the day, we're breathing very shallowly in the upper chest. We're not taking in deep breaths. So as we place our hands on the lower abdomen, we'll really tell the body we want to breathe from lower in the abdomen. So again, inhale, exhale, and try to feel that breath in the abdomen. So as many times as you want, just as you start to feel calm. Then taking the hands together, you want to bring the hands up, and then over your head, you visualize bringing the pure energy from nature down through the top of the head, down the body, and down to the level of your liver, which would be the bottom of your rib cage. And then putting the hands here. Oh, can't see. Here, yeah, okay. And then massage this part of the abdomen. So 6 circles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then again, raising the hands up. Inhaling. Exhaling as you bring the hands down. And then massaging. And then repeating. Visualizing you're bringing in this pure energy. Exhale. You're massaging out any of this stagnant anger, negativity, frustration, because it takes root in the liver, right? And then repeat. Inhaling. Exhaling. Okay. So you'll repeat that, right, at least 6 times. The other part that you can do is the practice of the healing sounds. So in addition to color, breathing, massage of the actual liver, the liver has a sound associated according to Chinese medical theory, and that sound is shu. So in English, it would sound like your shoe that you wear, but the is actually XU. So shu. So as you breathe in, you would exhale and pronounce this word shu. So the sound should harmonize to heal the liver. So this earliest record of this is in the 200s in Chinese medical texts. So apologies for the background noise. This is a very old practice. So Jiri found that this was beneficial for meditators, so he recommended it in his writings. So that's why we're still doing it. So you could again place the hands on the abdomen, breathe in, as you exhale, inhaling through the nose, exhaling through the mouth, again, inhaling through the nose, exhaling through the mouth. Inhaling, exhaling. So you practice this way. So these practices are meant to address anger as it becomes stagnant in the body as natural energy, and that being in the liver. So you can also combine inhaling, bring your hands up, exhaling. Oh, did it go down? Is the microphone better now? Sorry, the train throws off the microphone's level. You can inhale, bringing the hands up, and then as you exhale, shoo, and massage. So you can combine all three. Inhaling, shoo. Yes, one of the questions is, can the shoo be whispered? It can. In fact, there's writings on the question is whether it's purely the sound or the shape of the mouth. So there's a lot of research in meditation about the shape of the mouth as you exhale air and what that does to the body and the mind. So you can actually change your physiology, so how your body's reacting to situations through the mouth shape, so how you exhale. So if you're very open mouth or you're drawing the lips closed. So this theory is very similar to the Ki martial arts. So when you're exhaling and vocalizing in martial arts to push energy to a certain place. So there's, I think I read one of the old Taoist texts actually on this, said there's something like 30 some different breaths, ways to exhale. And initially I was like, what? You can only exhale one way. And it goes into all the different ways and then how they can be used prescriptively for certain issues in the body that you face. So the shoo has more to do, you don't have to do it as loud as I'm doing it. You can shoo. The idea is that you're really, really focusing the exhale, the breath, right? So if you just, versus if you vocalize, it slows your exhale down even more, right? So if we do inhale, exhale, my exhale ends there, but inhale, shoo. So there's an actual change in your breathing that's done because you're vocalizing. So yes, the volume doesn't have to be loud. It's just the mouth shape and the vibrational energy. So this is actually to help, physiologically address this anger. And so one of the tools that we want to do is look at, different ways anger manifests, frustration, impatience, all these different ways, right? It comes out. It's not just the full war, red face, ready to hit someone, anger, all these small ways that it comes out. So as we practice, we can address it from ethical practice. We can also address it from, I know it's stuck in me somewhere and try to massage it out. So this practice, right? You can do this, just sitting. You can take a short walk, so 10-minute walk in nature, and then sit in the park, and then shoo. So yeah, probably in the park you want to whisper, otherwise people think you're funny. So shoo. Then so right at the floating ribs, you see. So that's where your liver is. Massage. So if you can do this anytime, like I said, take a short walk, even your garden, go to a park, at least 10 minutes, and then sit. You could be on a bench, you could sit on the ground, and breathe and focus, right? Just bringing in the pure energy with your breathing, massaging. It's better, right? Absolutely best way, drink water after you do the practice, because when you actually massage your organs, you'll hear the same thing if you get massage from massage therapists to drink plenty of water afterwards. You're going to expel the impurities in the body. So you want to give a route for that to go. So drink extra water afterwards. Even though it's hot, and here in Portland we have a little heat wave coming this weekend, try not to drink icy cold water. Cool water would be okay. Like if you were just leave your glass on the kitchen counter, or herbal tea, something without caffeine, that would be better just to help flush. So when I say drink water, not beer, that's not going to help. We want to help just try to get rid of the impurities. So, cool water, not ice water. So that's good. Yes. Our resident expert in Chinese medicine has a great advice, right? Moves the lymph, cleans the blood, drink water, eat vegetables. I totally agree. So eating more vegetables also helps. There are connections and prescriptions to certain foods causing the movement of energy. So in this case, we're talking about anger. So more vegetables is better. Other types of energy can be exacerbated through the type of food you eat, but that's a conversation for another class. So we have a few more minutes. Are there any questions? Thank you, Kelly. Those are really good. Yes. Very good suggestions. If you're watching the chat, if you don't know, Kelly is a practitioner of Chinese medicine, so he is more qualified to give this advice. So everyone should take note. Are there any questions on that practice? It's very simple. These are very, very old practices. I think this is one of the benefits we have. They're not often taught these days to meditators, but it is very possible that something comes up as a part of spiritual practice. So, kind of like repressed memory, suddenly, these emotions come up, you need to know how to deal with them. Or, situationally, I think at the very least, it's fair to say we're all frustrated with the current state of things, or we have fear and trepidation, and that can manifest as anger, resentment, all kinds of things. So that can really help. So one of the questions is, when the shoe sound is used on its own without combining with the arm movements, are the hands placed on the abdomen or under the ribcage? So if you're not doing the hand motions, you're just breathing, you should place the hands on the abdomen. So you inhale, shoo. Inhale, shoo. That one. If people are interested, there's a longer version, so you would actually massage more of the body. We don't quite have time, but I think this is a really good starting point for the practice. This is very safe, so you don't have to worry about harming yourself. This is very gentle, so don't press really hard. This is very gentle. So you're just bringing and try to press more at the palm, not your fingers. So rubbing the whole palm, like right on the side of your floating ribs and the bottom of your rib cage. Right? So gentle. Be nice to yourself. Any other questions?
Sensei?
Oh, if there are practices for all the negative emotions, yes. There are practices for the big ones, right? Anger, hatred, out of control, or out of balance, I should say, energies that are associated with the major organ systems in Chinese medicine, and then both movement, sitting with the arm movement, very similar to this, body massage, sound, and then there's another version where you're actually standing and then would bend over and massage the legs. So there's practices associated for all of those to address those emotional components. These days, I think a lot of times you see it not explicitly taught as a meditation practice, but as people are working in the garden or working around the temple, so a lot of physical movements. We're very sedentary, so we actually have to do this. One of the questions is, what direction are you doing the practice? The tradition says you should do first. This is what, counterclockwise and then clockwise. But either way is fine. The main thing here, the purpose is bringing, actual doing massage to this area. So it's a self-massage. You can do both ways. When you do the legs later, it's the specific direction because it's going with your circulation. But for this one, it's either way is okay. Good questions. I appreciate people are asking. Any others? I'll just give our few announcements and give people time to type if there's any other questions. This Sunday, we will have the movie discussion. So you can look for that on the temple's webpage. I believe also there's a link on Facebook. So 2:30 Pacific time, we'll be discussing the movie Mandala, and it can be found on YouTube. So as usual, I'll try to recap the movie and bring out some highlights, and of course invite all of you to share your thoughts and if you have any questions. So we're trying to draw from Buddhist and Buddhist themed movies from a variety of different places, and thus far we've tried to balance it where we find one that's free, and then the following week, if it's not available for free, usually on YouTube or Netflix or one of the services online that can be rented for fairly inexpensively. So we're trying to do that alternation, so we're not spending more than $4 a month on our movie effort. So get your popcorn and a notepad. Please, if you have time, watch the movie, and I look forward to everyone's thoughts on that topic. And thank you, Jamie, for sharing the link. Yep, there's the link in the chat box. So please, everybody, stay healthy. Stay sane in all of the various challenges we're facing. Limit your news intake. It's not always positive to overload on it. Stay informed, but don't like everything, everything in moderation. So I hope to see you Sunday. If not then next week. I'm grateful that everyone is online. Stay safe, stay well, and I will see you next week. Have a good evening.